Are you hyped right now?
That was intense. It was real, you know. I like it. That intro video.
Club, loungy. Mike Lay texted me saying, "Hey, it sounds like Rick Ross was gonna give like a grunt in the background." So I said Drake might drop it like a yeah, but no, we didn't do that. Okay, guys, welcome to our National Leaders Call. It's our leadership masterclass, as we've already labeled it. We're very excited about today's speaker, Helen, who has an amazing story, which we're going to get to in a second, is going to go over recruiting. And I think all of you guys who are on this call understand what's at stake over the next 60 days, 90 days for everybody's career. And we all have bigger goals, 2, 3, 4 years ahead. But the most important thing that I've learned throughout my career has been, the best recruiter becomes the next assistant manager. And even as an owner, the owners who are the best at recruiting are the ones who build the biggest organizations and have the most successful offices. So we are so lucky today that Helen is going to break that down for us into extreme detail. Helen, welcome to the call. First of all, congratulations for being selected as a speaker. Your background and your story is really, really interesting and really cool. But just to start, Helen, you were an owner right before COVID. COVID happened. Now, which we'll get to that in a second. You were in Delaware, but you just moved to DC. You have 3 promotions, and so you're doing a kick-ass job. So I guess my first question would be, where are you from originally, and how did you end up on the East Coast?
So yeah, originally I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Well, my family's from Eritrea, East Africa, but originally I'm from St. Louis, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. My parents later moved to Boston, Massachusetts. But I went to boarding school for like most of my, later, like 7th to like 12th grade. So I didn't really live in Boston. I grew up in St. Louis. That's what my environment was. But then when I got to Boston, I was in boarding school. So that's how I ended up in the East.
Nice. You ended up playing basketball at Providence. You told me you had, some crazy sort of health issue that happened where you had to have heart surgery. So it sort of stopped you from getting to play basketball. And your family had this expectation for you to become, it was a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, right? And so
Yeah.
you did very well in school, even outside of sports. And you're telling me that you applied to Brown Medical School and you got accepted. And you had a year to sort of figure things out. And during that time frame, you gave this business a shot. There's a lot of people that look at our business and say, hey, no thanks, I'd rather do something in corporate. And you had something that's very prestigious lined up, but you decided to not go that direction. So can you break down like what made you choose that, and why did you pursue a whole different career path with your family's expectation, and maybe what your expectations were was to pursue a medical career?
Yeah, I think that's true. So engineer, lawyer, doctor. I think that's a lot of parents. I think want their kid to do that. Kind of what they always wanted to do. And it's also like a stability thing, right? Most parents think that those lanes are what's going to provide the most stability for their child. So that makes sense. But yeah, once I decided that, I majored in neuroscience at Providence, and then I thought that was going to be my thing. I hated hospitals though. So like working in a hospital wasn't going to make sense for me. I just needed time to like figure out, right? I went to school right away. Like I just never had time. It was just one thing after the next thing after the next thing. And I just needed a second. I did not think obviously that this was going to be my lane. Even like everybody else's story, I didn't even know what I was really doing. I was just like, hey, look, this is a cool crowd, cool office. I'm gonna try it. I have a year. If I end all be all in 12 months, I'll be in school and see how that goes. But best case scenario, I don't have to. So I get to choose at that point.
And you started in Boston, I believe, right? It was up there, and you started with Corey Bishop, and you were telling me how you just saw so much action, you saw so many promotions, and within your first couple of months, you were a part of an expansion to Rhode Island, and so that's where you ended up getting promoted. So you got promoted out of Rhode Island. You became an owner. I believe you told me it was November 2019. So you were only like 3 months before COVID happened. So you don't go to medical school, you get into our business, you become an owner, and then COVID happens, and you're just like, damn. And you went from you said you had 20 guys or 16 guys down to 2 people. What was your mentality during that stretch where everything stopped and you had to come back and completely rebuild? Because you said something interesting to me, which we'll get to in a second, but how did you look at the business? How did you look at yourself when everything sort of fell apart and you had to rebuild it?
It was funny. The day, and we can probably look at the Verizon trackers. We can go back in history. It's the day before, the Friday before we went on this like long break, and COVID happened and all that stuff. We did the most amount of apps I've ever done, like our office. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the best thing. This spring is going to be awesome. Everybody always talks about May recruiting. I'm excited. And then, we never got there. But when after we came back, I wasn't like super, actually, I wasn't super disappointed. Like after, people fell off and life was happening to people. I was like, yeah, this is not the best scenario to start in, but at the same time, understanding business and understanding our business. I remember Ken had a conversation one day with me talking about, some of the peaks in his business, what was going on in the economy, right? And he talked about, how during there was like some crash, I think it was like 2008 or 2007 or something like that. And that was some of the most growth he had in our business. So I was like, what better time to offer somebody, a career path than a time where nobody has a job. So I was super excited about that. I just started off super slow. We didn't come in like high intensity recruiting. It was kind of like foggy. Like I feel like everybody was kind of like going at their own pace. I don't know, Van, how it was for you when you came back, but it was weird.
No, I remember. Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. Yeah. And then you basically, I mean, there were so many conversations a year ago, and this is when Zoom kind of started for us. And I think that's why like these calls have made such a big impact, because it connected people. So if you were kind of foggy or you weren't doing well, you got to start seeing other people, and all of a sudden the exposure was there. And then you had no excuse because you saw all these other people growing. You had Richard Anderson, you had all these people really taking off. So it's kind of like, all right, well, now it's my time to go. And I remember you were telling me yesterday, you were like, I just never sort of lost my enthusiasm. I was just always thinking it was going to get better. And I was trying to figure out like, where's that come from? Because you got to be a pretty bold person to have the confidence to say, I'm not going to go to Brown Medical School. You studied neuroscience, and now you're going to go door to door, right? So to go from that to that, and then having the belief in yourself to stick with it, to go through COVID, and not to say, hey, I guess this is a sign that I'm supposed to go back to medical school. You said, no. I'm going to fix this. Where does that stem from? Where do you have that confidence in yourself to like stick with things, even though it might be against the grain or different?
I was telling you about this yesterday. Just a little bit about my family. I think it's a really odd story. I tell the guys about my parents all the time. They were like refugees in Eritrea, and they were both involved in like guerrilla warfare as teenagers. So they like escaped the country. They went to Sudan by foot, which is very far. If you look at a map of the continent of Africa, very far. And from a refugee camp, they were there for a few years, and that's how they came to America. But the actual transition and how far they had gotten, and I think it's really easy to give up, right? And I'm talking about my life now, right? And in our situation now, it's really easy to give up on things and quit really fast. But when you put yourself in a situation, you put yourself maybe in your parents' shoes or a family member's shoes or anything like that, where they don't have another option, right? There's just no other option. This is it, right? And when you're able to think like that, and they have the confidence in themselves, I really think it's genetic. Like my parents do not think there's like you cannot fail at whatever you do, right? That's why they had so much confidence in me to be an engineer, doctor, or lawyer. They're like, there's no way you can't do it. We do everything. We can do anything. We're confident. You're gonna be, badass, right? And I was like, well, that mentality can be taken into anything, right? So if I can do this and I can be badass at this, if I can hit my goals a lot sooner, then that's the goal, right? That's really what we want to do is the end goal. It's not really the job, right? It's the end goal.
Sure. Well, that's awesome. And, obviously you've seen your parents accomplish what they did, kind of makes you look at the problems that you experience like, hey, these aren't so bad. Like I can get through these. So, well, that's an incredible story. Like we mentioned, and Helen, you're doing a great job. So your topic is recruiting. And I think anyone that's on this call, have your notepads out. I also recommend guys taking screenshots if you're listening from your phone. If you guys have a manager, take pictures with your phone while you're watching the screens. And I know this gets sent out after. So Helen, why don't you get into your slides? The floor is yours.
All right, cool. Screen sharing here, right?
There you go. Technical difficulties?
Can you see it?
I saw it a second ago. I can't see it now.
There you go. Now you should be able to see it.
Oh, there we go. Yep. All right, I'm ready to take notes. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So I know this one's not as fancy as some some of these other owners. They're a little better at PowerPoint probably than I am. But I do want to get to the point, and I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions. So just make sure you keep shooting them in the chat. I'm just going to debrief a lot of the topics because again, I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions, and I want to get to those and kind of make it this like a conversation. So when it comes to the second round interview, in our office, I know we're big on like preparation because most of our offices don't look traditionally like an office. And they're pretty engaging. It's not your average office, right? So making sure that before you start an interview, you're not redundant. I think what happens a lot is somebody starts our interview process and they hear the same thing 3 or 4 times. So they get the point, especially when you're dealing with somebody super sharp. So the initial thing you want somebody to do is making sure you know how the process goes. So have you shadowed your administrator's initial call? Like what do they actually talk about and what do they cover in the initial call? Okay. And if you've covered that and you've shadowed that before, you definitely want to shadow a manager's first round or your manager's first round, because that's going to be a huge part of, what you're going to say next. Again, a lot of people end up being super redundant. So there's no difference in the first round or the second round in terms of content. Okay. And then are you reviewing the person's resume? Really looking at what their experience is. And then you can definitely add some challenge questions and we'll get there. But do you know who you're talking to? You know, and maybe where there are gaps in between the first initial call, again, the initial first round interview, and then, you know, reviewing the resume. And then what do you and your environment look like? So what I mean by that is, how do you look? Are you wrinkled out today, right? Is your shirt all wrinkled? Is your hair not brushed? Is your beard not shaped? You know, you don't want your interview to look better than you. So sometimes I know that, you know, we prepare people for whether it be the field interview or the in-office interview. Even if you're in the field, is your shirt tucked in? Do you have a belt on? You know, are you wearing, you know, decent shoes and your shoes aren't talking, right? And different things like that, and making sure that all those things are really together. Just so you look sharp. You just want to look sharp and make sure your environment is inviting. And then going from there, really understanding the mentality of the interview. I really want you guys to understand how important this part is, because it's not that most people can't do a second round or they're not good at second rounds. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm just not good at second rounds, or it's just something that I have, my retention hasn't been that great. And it's really just a mental thing. You're just looking at it the wrong way. A lot of leaders end up being super nervous during the interview, and they forget that the person sitting in front of them is actually the nervous one, right? They're the one that came in looking for a job today, not you. So you don't really have to worry about, you know, somebody coming into the interview, you know, ready to scold you. They're actually scared of you. So you have full, complete control in the interviews. Just remember that when you are conducting, just your attitude going into it should be, you know, that you're in full control. And then confidence in the script. Are you a pitch robot? So the reason why I said a pitch robot is because, you know, when somebody is, I just want you guys to relate this back to the field. When somebody's in the field and they start, you know, getting lost in the product, and they just become a pitch machine, right? You just call them the Verizon robot, the AT&T robot, things like that. People literally do that in the interview. They stop relating and they just become information machines. So instead of an interview, it actually feels like an infomercial, right? Like it's like late night. It's like I'm listening to this really long pitch, and people don't understand that, you know, you're not selling the job. You're just interviewing to see if somebody even fits, right? If they're the right fit for the opportunity, not making it make sense to them, which is why people end up asking that question, does this make sense? And I remember when I did assistant manager training, actually with Mike Lay, and he shadowed an interview, and I kept saying, does that make sense? Does this make sense? And then after the interview, Mike's like, you know, our business makes sense, right? And I'm like, yeah. Like, so why do you keep asking people if our business makes sense? Like, you're right, I don't know. So it's really something that I had to fix, because it makes sense. You can ask always if somebody's following you, and if you need any information repeated, and you want to be confident when you say those things, but everything makes sense, okay? So don't question where you're going or what you're saying. It's good, it's all good information. We tell you it, but trust me, it works. And then keeping it simple. So the mentality about it is you have to play, and we'll go into that, into the offense. So we're constantly just focusing on keeping it super simple, super simple. So you got to make sure that people are talking as much as you are. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're just talking and asking all these questions and talking, and you're not getting anything back, you should adjust, right? Something about your interview, something about your conversation right now needs to adjust. So focus on keeping it simple, because if it's overwhelming, then they're just going to sit there trying to listen to everything you have to say. And let's be honest, there's only so much information they're going to take on in this next, you know, 5 to 40 minutes. Cool. And then when I tell you, you know, remove the script, right? Get rid of the pitch. It's going over the job. The easiest way to do that is go to your who, what, when, where, and how, right? That's like super first grade. Okay. And really knowing, you know, who's our client. You just want to tell them who the client is. And this is, again, keeping it simple. What you do, right? Indirect versus direct marketing. When did we start? When did your client begin this approach? I know with Verizon, we go into the last, 12 years. Okay. And the launch of fiber optics and all these kind of things, the history there. And then we started, at this point, and now we're in this many locations. We're looking to open up in this many locations. So you're aware. Okay. And then the how. So how much success does this client actually have working with us? And a lot of clients during, the pandemic, got way more revenue or return on their investment now versus the last, decade. So using reference points like that based on what people are worried about now. If people are worried about job security and that's why they're leaving, bars and restaurants and things like that, talk about our stability, right? When the market is down, we are up, right? And that's something to be excited about. So when it comes to how much success, you definitely want to harp on those things because of our ability to maintain and sustain.
So I have a question, Helen. So I know that for me, one of the things that I struggled with when I first started interviewing people was my body language. I see a lot of people when they do the interviews, and I know some people will do the interviews in the office. Some people do the interviews where they sit down with them at lunch and they take them to the field. But I know at some point there's a sit down part where you're covering all this information. You're covering over the training program, you're recapping the pay. And I know that body language plays a huge part in that whole difference between interviewing and then seeming like a presentation. So what body language do you recommend when, someone's conducting the second round and talking to them about the things about the business?
So that's funny you say that, because I think there's a neutral place, because it's, especially if you're like not in an office space, right? Most people say, be as professional as possible, stand up as straight as possible, really be, and at some point you got to understand that you can't be overly uptight, I think, because again, you're trying to build a relationship and get somebody else to relax during the interview. You want them to be as comfortable as possible. Not that you're slouching or anything, but really be engaged. I think when it comes to body language, hand gestures to show how passionate you are, right? Your C factors, again, to show how passionate you are and how engaged you are, and making sure that they're, mirroring those things, same as you would in the field, right? Literally the same as you would in the field. But yeah, in an office space or anything like that, same kind of deal. Your body language is a huge part of the conversation. So being engaged, I always say, not leaning over on the tables, not trying to eat and drink at the same time. Like, you're having this conversation. Sitting up straight is always super important, but you have to be relaxed. It can't seem like the infomercial.
It seems like what I've noticed is what I recommend to people when they're doing the interview is whenever you're talking, like lean back a little bit, you know what I mean? And like kind of lean back in your chair and look really relaxed, and don't come across, because I've seen people talking about our business, they're leaning forward, their elbows are on the table, and it's almost like they look like a desperate salesperson. Obviously, when you guys are asking questions, that's when you're leaning forward and you're writing those answers down. But anytime that you're talking, you should sit back and you should relax and you should look as if like you know what you're doing. And even if you don't know yet, you got to have the appearance like you do. So I'm glad we mentioned that, because I think a lot of people struggle with how to position the way they're sitting or the way they're kind of talking to people when they're saying it. So thanks for answering my question. You can continue.
Thank you. And then, yeah, and next I wanted to go into growth. So this is a lot. If you can screenshot, I would screenshot this because it's more like information that you can just go through at any point. The most important thing I want somebody to understand about the growth opportunity, and when we are breaking down the growth opportunity, it's a list by list on what we do in each role. And obviously you can talk more in depth about entry level and account management, because those are the roles you're in, but you definitely want to harp on this being a student, harp on being a teacher, harp on the skill sets that you'll learn within the roles. But when it comes to upper management, I dumb it all the way down. Because if you're shadowing the interview with your manager, right, and you're shadowing the initial call, that's not necessarily the flow of the interview. Is the bigger picture is, yes, part of it. We know somebody can fit in the bigger picture, but I'm not using terms like when you run a business or when you're in charge of the business day to day. I just want somebody to understand that it's like an operations role, right? You're operating the structure and strategy of your office day to day. You're like full teacher mode. You're just teaching. You're giving back. You're helping people understand. You're getting your training together. Things of that nature. Things that are tangible. Things that people can actually sit on, right? Obviously, you want to read and relate when it comes to the individual you're talking to. But if you keep it super simple, somebody can see themselves in that role. And I always say, I don't remember in my interview, anybody talking about running a business or owning a business, because I could never see myself in that role prior to actually going through the program. Right. So if somebody had told me that, I think they only gave me my interview until account management, actually, to be honest, man. Because that made the most sense to me. It's just reading and relating again, like for the role that I was looking for. Okay, which is why it's so important to go through the initial call, the first round, and then preparing yourself for this call. I mean, for the second job.
So would you say, Helen, sorry to interrupt, would you say, because the training program, obviously people that do our business and stick with it, it's because there's opportunity, right? But obviously when you're first interviewing somebody and you got these levels, entry level, sales marketing, you got the leadership role, and then you got management, you're kind of tailoring whatever that person's really looking for is what you're kind of emphasizing the most, right? So if someone's just graduating college and they're looking for job experience, you're sort of kind of tailoring how this position gives someone a ton of job experience, leadership experience. Maybe if you're interviewing someone who's a little bit older, who's not entry level, who maybe has ran a business or is a high level executive, you're going to go more into the management side and the upper mobility side, correct?
Absolutely. Just like a kid that, when we hire interns, right? An intern, yeah, we can tell them about our program. They're definitely going to learn about it. But the first two roles are super important to them, right? What skill sets are they going to use going back to school? Okay, especially when you can relate it back to their major, communications or English or business, entrepreneurship, all these majors relate to any of our roles. So it's really important to have somebody understand that, I'm not going to give everybody the interview. It's, again, we don't offer, a home phone to somebody that's just looking for internet.
Yep.
Right. It's the same kind of concept as you would in the field, as you would carry on in the
Yeah. So it's not about, you always break down the business opportunity. You don't just stop at entry level. You
Yep.
always talk about our mobility. You just kind of have a more of an indifferent approach to someone who's not so focused on, running a business yet or making that type of money or having that type of responsibility. You just kind of indifferently throw it out there like, and by the way, if you want to move up to these levels, this is where someone's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep. Exactly. That's literally exactly how we do. So it's there. It's the role is there, and we always talk about the availability in that role. It's not just one person that gets to those places. We have opportunity for multiple people to be in those roles. It feels better when people know that there's not only one person that's going to get there. Okay, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and you just
Right.
and everybody has to realize, yeah. There's absolutely and one thing to remember, because I've seen leaders that sometimes they do too much tailoring where they forget to mention the opportunity. Like you gotta talk about it. Like that's our business,
sure.
Why we're growing. And I always just jonesed myself when I did the interview. Like yeah, so really what got me excited was this position, the fact that I could move up so fast into it. And I'm already progressing there. So it's not like we want anybody to say, hey, management's kind of there for people who want it. Like, no, that's what our business is. But here's the other roles that you take on as you grow into it. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. But no, all really good stuff. Really good stuff.
For sure. Like I came into, if somebody did my interview, they would think that I was just for the summer, right? Because I was going to go back to med school in the fall or something like that. But I was actually just, the only reason I'm going to med school is to make money. So if you gave me a role, I was going to do that anyways.
Absolutely.
Just throw it out there, right? So cool. And with that being said, overcoming objections, I just debriefed there that it's all about playing offense and taking away the defensive. We're always in defense mode, and I tell people, hey, we're on the other end. We should play offense as much as possible. So, when it comes to Saturdays and hours, it's black and white. I don't say it as an optional route. I'm like, hey, look, guys, this is our schedule. And I say it with confidence. And I'm like, we even get to hang out on Saturdays, make a little extra money, and this and this and this. What people end up doing is explaining why we work Saturdays right after they break the schedule down. And I'm like, hey, this person probably, the amount of people that already work Saturdays, you'd be mind blown, right? So hearing Saturdays as a day that somebody has to commit to is not that crazy, right? You don't have to explain that right after you tell them that they have to work Saturdays. Right. Same thing with sales or commission. The reason, we're too busy trying to impact instead of it already makes sense, guys. Right. The right person is going to know that why it makes sense. Right. So don't go commission. Do you know why we pay commission or anything like that? And I feel like that's the next level, that someone follows up with a question right after they make a statement. Like that was a firm statement. That was black and white. And then we can go from there. Right? Because and if you listen to the interview that the manager does, it was already stated, and they came in still for that job interview. Right? We already went over the hours in fact. And they still came in and they knew that. And if you shadowed that interview, this is not the first time that they're hearing that, which is why, they're still excited to see what's going on. So you just have to focus on making sure that that person's excited. Follow me?
And how do you handle, I wanted to make sure, because I know a lot of guys always ask about objections. How do you handle someone that's like, oh man, so, I just don't know if I could do door to door, or I don't know if I could do, let's just start with the hours. If they say, man, that just kind of seems like a lot of hours.
Cool. When somebody goes, that just seems like a lot of hours, I agree. I'm like, it definitely is. And then you want to go into the time, I go right into the time frame. And then we talk about, if we're going to impact on hours or talk about hours, I want to, we go back to frontally loaded business, right? And they're like, hey, this just seems like a lot of hours. Yeah, you're totally right. I'm not going to say no, they're wrong. Like, you're wrong. No, I wouldn't say that. No, you're absolutely right. The reason why we worked a lot of hours is because our business is frontally loaded. So we get a lot of things done on the front end, right? It's full, dense training for like the first 6 to 8 to 10 months. And then once somebody, if you're the right person for that role, once somebody, graduates into more of a director role or management role, we then look to, you can kind of make your own schedule. So I'm like, we then look to, make your own schedule. What's a more fitting schedule for you? It has to be rewarding in some way though. So
Sure.
Sometimes I think we impact and we expect it to just, drop a bar, right? And it's like, hey, this is what it is. Didn't you like how I said that? I'm savage.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. It has to like make an impact. Like they actually have to reflect and be like, oh, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. I'm uncomfortable with commission. I've never worked on it before.
Or have I? Oh, you're actually, okay.
Oh,
you're asking me a question. Okay, cool. All right, man.
Honestly, it all sounds good. I'm really looking for like stable pay, and I'm just really worried about commission.
Okay, cool. And this is a great part for you to introduce your systems. So we go into Van's, hey Van, I understand you probably never worked in a role where you were getting a commission type of pay. In our business, and then I go into our client, so I'll talk about Verizon. This is what our actual system looks like. We pull up on these pre-generated lead basis, and then I re-bring up the client again after I go over our system, and it's very realistic numbers. And then when I go over because again, logic, right? Just being logical. And then I go back into our client, and that's more importantly why I work with a company like Verizon, right? That's leading the internet, the new age of internet. It looks like this and this and this, right? And then most importantly, I want to top it off with saying that this is the amount of revenue that we've generated for this client, and that's why we're confident that with this style of pay, somebody will actually make more money, right? So it's just about, and I think not enough people do that, like bring in real life stats. People are going to be like, holy crap, you guys brought in during the last year, 70% of all revenue, all new acquisition of customers to Verizon. They were like, really? Yeah, seriously. Isn't that crazy?
Nice.
So impacting them just with numbers.
And it also sounds like one of the first responses you have to objections or rebuttals is you agree with them. Like you're not being combative. You're not trying to like start an argument, and I think sometimes people, they forget by relating to your interviews when they have objections, it makes you so much more human. And then they start to understand like, wow, you were kind of like me. So when I asked, hey, it seems like a lot of hours, you're like, it totally is. Well, let me explain why. I was like, and then you could even say, yeah, I had the same question. Good question. If I said, hey, I'm a little bit worried, I'm looking for something stable. Totally get it. I had the same thought, but let me explain to you a little bit about our systems and why, we have so much success and how much revenue we're generating for the client, and why people without sales background are coming in and doing a great job. It's really because of our client and our systems. We have, and you guys should always bring up, we have X amount of people working here, and whatever, 80% of our staff never have sales experience, and everybody's got bills, so we must be doing something right. You know what I mean? We're not paying people's rent. So I think it's important when you guys hear how Helen's overturning the objection, she's quickly agreeing with my objection, saying, I totally get it. That's a great question. Let me explain why. One more objection I know people get is, hey, so what's like the turnover here?
I'm 100% super honest about this. Even when somebody doesn't ask, me personally, don't,
Yep.
not everyone has this, but I always go into the stats. I look at our real life numbers at the office and I go over, hey, this is our average turnover. This is in our entry level role, in our leadership role. I can count on one hand how many leaders we've lost in the last year. And then I go into our assistant management role, how many assistant managers we've lost in the last year. And here at Edge, how many managers we've lost in the last year, and I go into real life numbers, right? So it just, there's no reason, because when somebody starts, they're going to see it anyways. But you also have to talk about why the turnover is the way it is, and I always talk about in our entry level role, it requires a lot of communication. It actually requires talking to people. The hardest thing to do in 2021 more than ever is talking to people. It's crazy, right? You don't have to go grocery shopping and talk to a human. You don't have to call your mom. You can just text her, right? You don't have to order. You don't have to go to the mall to buy clothes. You don't have to do any of those things. So we're actually doing a lot of face-to-face interaction.
Yep.
That's why it doesn't always work.
And one of the things too that's helped with myself, even when she brings it up, is when someone says, hey, what's like the turnover here? Just giving them responsive. It's pretty standard, like at any entry level. We're pretty much just like any other entry level position, where if you go to Starbucks, you go to Target, there's going to be turnover at the entry level. But as someone moves up into our leadership positions, the turnover drops dramatically, and in management, it's almost zero. But then you can kind of finish by saying, but thankfully, we haven't had to lay anybody off, even through a pandemic. That's one of the benefits of our business.
I like that.
We don't have to lay people off because our clients are always needing more customers. So in terms of job security, it's really incredible. People have a safe place where they can grow and they can stay. So just
absolutely
some feedback. But okay, cool. Any other? I mean, those are some of the main ones I know that people ask is, oh, what about door to door? So this is door to door.
So yeah, we follow up and I go back into our system. I agree with everything. The thing about the objections though that I want to talk about a little bit, Van, is that an objection doesn't necessarily mean that that's not what they're it's not necessarily something that needs an impact all the time, because it doesn't mean that they need to know. If you go on Google, Van, you are going to go on Google right now, and it says questions to ask my recruiter. These are the questions that come up. Re-ask, like, go over the job again, go over the schedule again, ask about the pay, ask about what challenges someone encounters at the job, right? So most people are just going on Google and seeing how they should conduct this interview. And if you look at every objection that we might get in an interview, that's literally what it is. So a lot of people are just doing it to impress the interviewer, to see if they're really paying attention, right? Also to reconfirm. It's just making sure. I just want to make sure I got that down. I just want to make sure I went over that. Just because you gave me a lot of information, I just want to make sure I have all that down. So that's what you're going to see a lot of the time. So just remembering, I'm super confident. I always agree with the objection, how you said, just due to that, just purely due to the fact that I know people just want to make sure this is what they want. And sometimes it's not, and that's okay. Right? Because you don't want to bring that person in and people are like, oh, I can never retain anybody. I was like, well, that person probably shouldn't have started here to begin with.
Yeah. So the first step is you just, you agree with whatever their question is. You say, that's a great question. And then you just take ownership of it. You quickly respond confidently, like, yeah. And so, because when someone gives you an objection, you guys are really hesitant in your responses, you take your time and you're beating around the bush, that shows weakness. It's kind of like an objection in the field. Like, you got to be able to answer it, confidently respond, and then reassume control by asking a question back to them, which I know is a big part of sort of the interview process. Is don't answer a question without following up with a question of your own to reassume control of the interview. So all really good stuff. And I know, guys, if there is other questions about objections, we'll make sure that, Helen sends out her script and her objections and all that kind of stuff after the call as well. So, all right, Helen, I just want to do a quick little objections back and forth so you can continue.
Okay, cool. And this is our last slide, and then we can definitely open it up for questions, is rehash. Guys, most important part of your second round interview is the rehash. You need to be able to know, like, when their soonest start date is, right? Let them know what happens moving forward. So right after, they come to the office, this is exactly what's going to happen. So they're super prepared for that. Make sure you grab their number from, like, your administrator and actually reach out. keep up and say, hey, and shoot them an email and say, hey, I'm Helen, I did your interview today. I don't know if you remember me, or, go a little quirky joke, whatever inside joke you guys made from the interview today. I really enjoyed having you. I heard you got offered a job here in so and so and so. Like, to have a little like mini paragraph or something like that to just follow up with a person, that's like so nice. Like, that's so genuine. People appreciate that stuff. Goes a mile. It goes very far. So when people are constantly like, my guys like just never show up, everybody I start just like never shows up. And it's like, well, what happened after the interview? And they're like, nothing. I'm just like, they were supposed to start today. I'm like, yeah, did you keep up? And when did you hire them? A month ago? 2 weeks ago? Most people put in 2 weeks. That's standard, right? So making sure that, 2 weeks from now, yesterday we had a new start from a month ago. And it's just, again, making sure we're keeping up with that person once a week, or, that weekend, or after I did the interview that night, something like that. And then maintaining a second round tracker. So, man, we do this thing in our office where somebody should know who they took out, when they took them out, when their start date is, what's their primary form of contact. And then, obviously, if they started them or not. And if they declined, why did they decline? Right. And always having that after every single interview. So you're constantly working on something. And then, when somebody's like, hey, do you ever know what happened to this person? I'm like, well, you should know what happened to that person. I mean, that's like it's your guy. What happened? So the rehash is super, super important. And I think a lot of guys forget that part of it.
Now, I know that for a lot of people, there's college graduates right now, they don't have jobs. So I know that some people have the 2-week notice. But I think what I see a lot of people struggle with when they're doing the second interview is they don't know how to command the start date and properly kind of like fear loss the person and create urgency in the interview based on how many people are applying and what's going on. So I know that one of the objections guys get is, hey, when can you start? We have 5 other candidates that can all start right away. When can you start? And the candidate says, I've got a couple more interviews. I could probably start next week. How do you handle that person?
Well, going into it, at the end, I'm always like, hey, look, so, at the end of the interview, when I wrap it up, I know this is what's happening next. We did have about, 40 interviews on the schedule this week, and we're only moving forward with anywhere between, 4 and 5 people. But we are starting orientation as soon as Monday. So I just wanted to make sure if your start date is that soon, or what your start date is, so we can plug you in. So, you definitely have a spot. I can't, but again, I don't make that final decision. So I just wanted to catch your start date. Yeah. And just like reiterate it. And if they're like, ooh, what? Wait, they're like, I'm pretty sure I can start on that Monday. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it just happens really fast, right? You're just trying to get them in really fast. I know some people hire next day. If their urgency is there, they're that excited, right? So it's all about gauging that too. But there definitely has to be some fear of loss there. So definitely, breaking down how many interviews they did this week, and, how many you've done this week, and how many you're actually looking to move forward with.
Yeah, it's one of the first things you guys should start off with is by congratulating the candidate by saying, hey, congrats for getting to the second interview. We've sat down with so many people this week. So for you even making it to this level, that's definitely an accomplishment. But I will tell you that, now that we've narrowed it down to our top, 5 or 6, we're looking to hire our top 2 or 3. And the candidates that we have are all very qualified, and they've all informed us if they would be offered a position today, that they'd be able to start immediately. So if you were to be offered a position by the end of today, what's as soon as you'd be available to start? And kind of like setting the tone. So and we know that like if whatever start date they give you guys in the beginning of the interview, you got to check back on that halfway through the interview and then ask them that at the end. If that start date changes, then something kind of went wrong, right? If they say, oh, I can't start for a week, or they can start tomorrow, and then at the end of the day, I can't start for a week. Well, what happened? You can talk about it. But then the other way can be, oh, I can't start for a week. But since you did such a good job fear of lossing them, by the end of the interview, they're so excited. They're like, I can start tomorrow, right? Or whatever the start date you guys have. So Helen, that's really good information to use the numbers to fear of loss them about, what's going on, but also use the opportunity about growth and about urgency from the client as another reason why you guys are hiring and training. So all really good stuff.
For sure. But I know we were short on time, so I did want to open the floor for questions.
Yes. So guys, please ask questions in the chat. I'll start off with a couple of them. Now that we have a little bit of time, let's go through some of those objections, some more of them. How do you handle benefits? I know that some people, especially graduates, will ask, well, are there benefits? What type of benefits are offered with the company? That was what my mom told me to ask when I was going through the interview process. So how do you handle that objection?
To be honest, man, every time somebody asks about benefits, I always respond, well, what kind of benefits are you looking for? Initially, because I say, hey, we may offer some, we may not, but I want to know what kind of benefits you're looking for. Most people just go, like the benefits. Like, well, we have a lot of benefits. There's a lot of cool things going on. No, I'm pretty transparent about that. So I'm like, hey, we don't offer benefits right now. After somebody gets into more of a management role, where that's something where they can definitely set up for themselves at that role. But I keep it super, super brief, right? And that's something that, I'm not looking to impact, right? We're not looking to tell somebody, why they should or should not be looking for something. But most people are told to ask these questions. Again, if you go on Google and you ask, like, what questions should I ask the interviewee? It's going to be, what are the benefits? But most people don't necessarily know why I think they're asking.
Yep, for sure. And also, I know that, like, one of the things that I learned early on when someone says, are there benefits? Like, at the entry level, obviously it's the beginning process. We have to figure out if someone can actually, perform and do well in our business. But once someone moves up into a management position, they're going to have many options of doing whatever they want to do from a benefits perspective. But then I also come back with a question. Like you said, like, what type of benefits are you looking for? And then and if they say, oh, health insurance, you say, great. Well, are you under the age of 26, right? Are you still on your parents' plan? And they're like, well, yeah. And it's like, okay, so are you going to leave their plan or what? So, like, anybody that's 26 or under, they can still be on their parents' healthcare plan. So make sure you guys are actually asking them, and not everybody's going to be under 26, but get to the bottom of it. And then obviously educate them about how benefits work by being like, yeah, do you know how benefits work? It's not free. They take a portion of the pay out of your paycheck. So, that's not something we would do. You'd have the options of doing it yourself once you get into management. But those are all something that we discuss once someone progresses to that level. But just making sure if they're 26 or under, they're probably on their parents' benefits plan, right? So, anyways, okay. So what are the most influential, challenging questions you asked during the second round? Great question. I know that other people were asking about the interview questions that you ask them. So what are some of those?
My favorite question is obviously, and it's kind of a joke question that I ask people. Like, if they could do anything right now, like post-pandemic, they could work anywhere, or they could, run their own type of show, do their own type of thing. What would they be doing? Most people don't, I guess the question, I go in with looking for an answer. So most people are going to say, I want to run this thing, or, I want to do something. And those people that are like crazy ambitious, I llove those people. I'm like, yes, let's do it. That's awesome. Versus the person that's like, well, I just want to be an accountant, that's like, the goal of mine, like, I'm just looking to do like accounting. I'm like, all right. So I go, oh, wow, that's sweet. All right. So it kind of tells you like how someone's mental looks, or, how optimistic they are about opportunities, and how optimistic they are about, finding other lanes. If they're really straight and narrow and this is it, and this is the end all be all, really just talking. It might be how you adjust the interview. It might be, you might come back to it, or something like that. So really important to know. And then another question I like to ask is, at the end, we go, if there was one reason that we decided not to hire you today, what do you think that reason would be? And that was a question I actually got from when I was in leadership. One of my leaders used that question, and I thought it was awesome. He asked me, and I was like, whoa, that's a great question.
If there was one reason, hold on, if there's one reason why we would decide not to hire you today, what would that be?
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
And then people like sit there for like 3 minutes, and they're like really thinking really hard. And the really humble people are super honest. They're like, maybe I'm not the best communicator, and, I can get better at, my leadership skills. My experience isn't, where it needs to be, but that's also why I think I would be a great fit, and they'll really start, coming out of their shell a little bit and telling you, their weaknesses and things like that without having to direct those questions to that. And that's a really cool question. So those are some of my two like must-have questions.
Now, what happens when you ask questions and you don't get the answers you're kind of looking for? So let's say you ask someone, so what are your goals long term? And if they say, honestly, like, I'm really just looking for a job to pay my bills, or I'm just looking for something stable, which, like stable, everybody wants to be stable, but sometimes you get those vibes where a person's trying to tell you that like, maybe this is, whatever you're talking about is not necessarily what they're wanting. How do you deal with like answers are going the wrong direction?
Yeah, so if I'm not getting like the answers that would like excite me in this interview, and they're kind of like going the opposite way, I just come back to like, why us? Like, why'd you come back? Why do you want to do something like this? Right? Why edge? Why us? And why is this a business that attracted you? Why did you decide to come back into it? And it's not a negative question. It's just like, you just kind of want to know where their head's at. And
Yeah.
some people are just looking for a job, and that's okay.
Yep.
That is totally cool. Because that's what we have. That's the opportunity we have to offer. So if a job is what you need, we have that. If an opportunity is what you need, we have that. If growth is what you need, we have that. Money is what you need, we got that too. So it's kind of just, it's for everybody. And some people can sometimes overanalyze who they want to bring in and who they don't, because this person just doesn't want management. It's like, I didn't want management when I started. So I wasn't really sure.
What are things or what are you looking for in people that you don't want to hire? So what are the characteristics that you're like, you kind of look at and say, hey, this person's not qualified to bring on board? Because I think like you said earlier, some people, they're trying to, close people that are just really giving them negative buying signs, and it ends up being somebody maybe you drag into the business that shouldn't be doing
it. That's interesting. Because if it's just dragging, they're probably gonna, if they're gonna decline, I would still offer. To be honest, I would still offer and see if they would decline. Because I think it's a challenge more for me, bringing them into a space, bringing them into our office, and obviously the unprofessionalism and things like that. That's like a total no-go for me. Total no-go. But if there are some things, maybe it's just like a mindset thing. Those are some things that sometimes you just need to bring somebody into a different culture and a different space. And sometimes the environment is everything. It's like, man, if this guy got to see one day in this office, he would change his whole perspective. His attitude would change on, just work.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, they look too much at the second interview, or even owners, they look at the prelim or the second interview like that's the tryout. I look at training as the tryout. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Training is where you're going to see what people are made of. Some people don't interview well. Some people are really nervous. Some people, they just act weird and strange. But maybe they come in and you say, hey, I'm going to give you a shot. Our business is all about taking chances on people and seeing what they're made of. And it's hard to tell sometimes just in a few hours or whatever to know what someone's capable. Obviously, if someone's unprofessional, if they're rude, if they're totally, not a good fit, then they're not a good fit. But take chances, give people a shot, be open, open your arms to people. Now, if they start to disrespect the business or you or the client, they got to go right away. But I strongly recommend, like Helen said, you heard Helen, she's like, I like to give people a chance, and I'm going to try to close them to see what they're made of once they go into training. And if they say, no, it's not for them, then it's not for them. Okay. A couple more questions. This is an objection. Actually, I was going to ask you. So they're looking at the training program, you're going over the client, and they ask you, so what happens if I don't sell anything?
Cool. So that's a good question. I always go back into our system, but I also give them a stat, right? Have we had somebody that like doesn't sell anything after training? Don't.
Yeah.
So that's like something I literally, I want to go back to the stats, but I don't want to use that as a defense. Like, we don't have anybody that doesn't sell anything. I just want to go into the actual system. I'm like, hey, look, let me go back to the system. You might have missed out on me like explaining that part, and just literally giving them real life stats, because they're only human and they think they don't have a skill, the skill sets maybe required for this. But it's super simple because we just follow a system. I'm like, hey, look, if you're saying you're not going to sell anything because of this, this, don't beat yourself up. It's totally cool. It's a lot easier than you think. But I want to go back into explaining our system one more time, just so you know why we see the success that we see.
Yeah, and I think that what you guys have heard Helen say is like, I totally get it. Great question. I had the same question. But the reason why we don't really have that issue where people aren't like selling or making money, because obviously if we're not selling, we don't have this client. Like, you can go back, like, we obviously do this. And again, going back to the fact that many of the people that work here don't have a sales background. So this is not like hardcore, pushy, aggressive sales. This is just people being themselves and using a system that really, really works. So let me reiterate that system and how the law of averages work. But I can tell you, our business doesn't succeed unless people that come out of training are successful. So we're heavily invested. And I always like to tell people, if you were to get the position, then you'd actually be matched up with me, where I would be in charge of training you for an entire week, both in the office and in the field, hands-on training. We don't just throw people to the wolves like some other companies do and just give you a booklet and say, hey, go study and go out there. We really are invested to make sure people have the best chance at success. But it's really rare. Just say it's really rare when people don't sell anything, but we work over the course of a week and our average person's doing this much to this much per week. Do you think you could be above average? Okay, cool.
Yeah, and just being transparent about it. It's like, this is what I did, right? And these are my numbers. This is what, week after week, or this is our best guy. Hey, I'm gonna be honest with you. This is our worst. So it's like saying things like, not worse, but one of our newer guys is actually just started last week, and using that example. Because they can come in and be like, hey, they talked about you. Can I work with you a little bit? Because I know you're like the newest person here. And I remember that from the interview.
Okay, last question. Does recruiting stop after someone starts, or do the techniques just change?
I guess I don't understand that.
So I think some people think like, okay, I've recruited somebody, and so now they're on my team. But the recruiting aspect of like relationships and answering questions, because some people start, but they're still not all the way in, right? So how do you handle a person that's testing the waters? Like they just want to come in and just see what it's all about. So how do you handle those people in their first few days?
Yeah, the recruiting never stops, ever at any point. So in the first few days, I always say the relationship comes first, right? Because if you're similar and you're relatable, they can do it because you can do it. Like, you're just like me. And so that I want to start there, because I'm pretty sure we do the threes rule, right? The first 3 days, they stay because they like you and they think you're awesome. The first 3 weeks, show them a little bit of money and they're like, okay, I can do this. And they feel like they can make money too. They've seen it. In the first 3 months, they like see the opportunity. They start hopping on calls and they start networking and they go on a road trip and all these things. And that it just never stops, right? It just keeps going. The questions are going to keep coming, right? Just because somebody gets in the leadership role doesn't mean they stop asking a manager about what a manager does on the back end, or how recruiting works, or how the administrator funnel works and stuff like that. So no, the questions just become a little different, but the recruiting never stops.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Helen, I know you don't have a slide up with your information, but we will make sure to send out your info so guys can get on a call with you or any of your leaders to sort of recap these questions. I thought that this was a really, really great meeting today. I got a ton of notes, and I know the guys on the call and girls are obviously always looking to improve their recruiting skills. So Helen, thank you so much for taking the time to impact all of us. We're grateful for it. And guys, please make sure every week, 8 a.m. or 8 a.m. on the West Coast, 11 a.m. on the East Coast, hop on the call and listen in. Helen, any last words of advice for the guys?
I guess I'll be sending, I'll also send some of the guys in the office that are really, really great at second rounds that I think would be super helpful in that networking kind of, in the email thread as well.
Yeah. And I think also, Helen, you sending like your script and your objections,
okay.
The thing that you give your leaders, send that out so the owners can take a look at it, take what they like, leave what they don't, because everybody kind of does some different things. But I think it would be great for everybody to see that script that you give your guys and how they use it. So, all right, Helen.
Well, all right. Thanks, man.
Yes. Everybody have a great week, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Take care.